Evelyn Hart had grown up in a small, quiet town where neighbors knew the sound of each other's footsteps on the wooden sidewalks, and where secrets never stayed secret for long. She had lived most of her life under the roof of her aunt, a woman who believed that life was a serious journey, where comfort was a luxury, and joy was something earned, not given. Evelyn respected her aunt, but she often wondered what it would feel like to live for herself instead of living according to someone else's rules. Her aunt had taken her in after her parents passed away when she was young. Evelyn remembered little of her mother's soft laughter or her father's warm hands. Those memories lived somewhere deep inside her, like old letters hidden in a drawer, faded but not fully gone. Her aunt, in contrast, was a strict woman who believed that hardship was a stronger teacher than affection. Love, in her house, was expressed through chores done correctly, bread baked perfectly, and responsibilities fulfilled without complaint. By the time Evelyn reached 20, her aunt believed it was time for her to marry. Marriage, in her aunt's eyes, was not a matter of romance or dreams but survival. Their finances were thin as paper. Bills stacked like quiet threats on the table every month. Food stretched only as far as her aunt's careful planning could make it go. So, when a woman from the sewing circle spoke of a rancher in Wyoming searching for a mail-order bride, her aunt's eyes lit up with a kind of relief Evelyn had never seen. To her aunt, this was an opportunity. To Evelyn, it felt like stepping into a world she had never visited, with a man she had never met, in a place she could hardly imagine. Her aunt made the decision with firm confidence. Letters were exchanged, photographs requested, though the rancher sent none, and arrangements made. Evelyn was told only what the townspeople repeated. The rancher was a tall, strong man who ran a large cattle ranch. He worked from sunrise to sunset, handled horses with ease, and could lift a hay bale as if it weighed nothing. Some said he had once been involved in a fight that ended badly. Others whispered he had a temper. Rumors traveled faster than truth, and Evelyn heard too many of them to stay calm. She lay awake many nights wondering what kind of husband she was being sent to. Her imagination, untamed by reassurance, painted all sorts of frightening pictures. She imagined a rough man with harsh eyes and a voice like thunder. Someone who would not smile. Someone who would not listen. Someone who would treat her as if she were simply a helper and not a partner. Her aunt only said, "A husband is a blessing, not a comfort. You will make it work." But Evelyn longed for a bit of softness, a gentle word, something that would tell her she was more than a burden being passed from one household to another. Still, she knew arguing would change nothing. Her aunt had made the arrangements, bought the train ticket, and packed her trunk with clothes that had been folded so tightly they hardly had room to breathe. The morning Evelyn left, the town was quiet. A few neighbors watched from their porches as she and her aunt walked toward the station. Some offered small nods of sympathy. Others whispered behind gloved hands. To them, it was a brave thing, or perhaps a strange one, to marry a man you had never seen. The train station felt too big for her small hopes. Steam clouded the air, the whistle echoed through her bones, and the platform smelled like travel and change. Evelyn held her ticket so tightly that her fingers ached. Her aunt stood stiff beside her, giving instructions that sounded more like warnings. Mind your manners. Work hard. Keep your worries to yourself. Remember, a good wife brings peace to her household. Evelyn nodded, though her throat felt tight. She knew her aunt cared in her own rigid way. But the farewell felt final, like pages closing on one chapter before she had learned how to read it fully. When the train arrived, Evelyn hugged her aunt one last time. It was not a warm embrace, but she held on a second longer than usual, hoping her aunt might soften. Instead, her aunt simply patted her shoulder and said, "This is what's best." And so Evelyn stepped onto the train with a heart full of questions and a future drawn by the hands of others. The long journey west was both beautiful and exhausting. Miles of open land stretched beyond the windows, rolling hills, golden fields, rivers that glimmered like silver threads, and mountains rising like silent guardians. Evelyn watched everything with wide eyes, trying to let the scenery distract her from the knot of worry twisting inside her. Sometimes she imagined she was traveling for adventure, for opportunity, for a life she had chosen. But each time she remembered the groom waiting at the end of the tracks. Her stomach tightened again. She spoke little during the journey. A few kind travelers asked where she was headed, and she answered politely but vaguely. She did not want to explain that she was going to marry a stranger. Whenever she tried to picture her future husband, her thoughts drifted back to the rumors. Big, rough, dangerous, unkind. She wondered if she would ever feel comfortable in his presence. At night, she slept lightly, waking whenever the train shifted or the whistle blew. Sometimes, she dreamed of her parents, though she could not hear their voices. Other times, she dreamed of wide fields and unfamiliar rooms, places she might soon call home. She wondered if anyone had truly asked the rancher what he wanted in a wife. Did he want a quiet woman, a hard-working one, or did he simply need help around the ranch? She wished she knew. Uncertainty was the hardest part. After days of travel, the train slowed as it approached Wyoming. The land looked different, drier, wider, with fewer trees and more sky. Towns grew smaller and farther apart. People who boarded the train carried tools, feed sacks, and supplies, hinting at the hard work that defined life in the West. Finally, the conductor called out the name of a town Evelyn had never heard, but would now remember for the rest of her life. Red Creek. Her hands shook as she gathered her small suitcase and stepped onto the platform. The air felt different, fresh, crisp, carrying the scent of dust and open fields. The town was modest, just a handful of buildings clustered along a single street. A general store, a saloon she tried not to look at, a stable, and a small office near the station. A few townsfolk watched the arrival of the train with mild curiosity. Evelyn scanned the platform for a man who matched the frightening descriptions she had heard. She expected someone who stood out with a fierce expression, perhaps wearing a rough coat or scowling at the crowd. Instead, she noticed a tall cowboy standing quietly near the hitching posts. He wore a clean, sun-faded shirt, well-worn boots, and a hat he held respectfully in his hands. His shoulders were broad, but his posture was calm. His face carried a softness that surprised her. He looked patient, as if he understood the value of silence. He saw her before she had the courage to approach. For a moment, Evelyn considered the possibility that this gentle-looking man was simply waiting for someone else. But then he took a slow step toward her and spoke in a voice steady enough to ease the trembling inside her. "Are you Miss Evelyn Hart?" His question was polite, almost cautious, as if he didn't want to startle her. Evelyn nodded, though her pulse rushed in her ears. "I'm Luke Kerrigan," he said. I'm the one you've come to meet." The fear that had pressed on her chest for weeks loosened a little. This was not the rough, harsh man the rumors had painted. His eyes were warm, steady, and earnest, nothing like the storm she had imagined. Still uncertain, she swallowed and slowly asked, "Are you the man I'm supposed to marry?" Luke looked as if he understood how hard it must be for her to ask that. Instead of stepping close or claiming her hand, he simply gave a gentle nod. "Yes, ma'am, only if you're willing. I know coming all this way must have been hard." His voice was gentle in a way she had not expected from a Western rancher. It felt like someone laying a warm blanket over her shoulders. She lowered her gaze shyly, unsure how to respond as a swirl of relief and confusion rushed through her. Noticing her nervousness, Luke spoke again, softer this time. "You don't need to be afraid. I'll be gentle with you, I promise." The words surprised her. No one had ever spoken to her with such simple kindness. She didn't know what kind of husband he would be. But in that moment, she understood one thing. He was nothing like the monster she had been warned about. He offered to carry her suitcase, but waited for her nod before taking it. As they walked toward his wagon, he moved at a pace that matched hers. Careful not to rush her, he asked simple questions about her trip. Whether she needed rest, if she was hungry but never pushed, never assumed. Evelyn wasn't sure what kind of life waited for her on his ranch, but for the first time since her aunt had given her the ticket, she felt a quiet sense of hope blooming inside her. Perhaps this journey was not the end of her freedom but the beginning of something gently unexpected. And as Luke helped her onto the wagon, she realized she had stepped into a story far kinder than the one she had imagined. The wagon waited near the edge of the station, its wooden wheels slightly dusty from the rough Wyoming roads. Luke had tied his horses loosely, as if he didn't want to rush anything that involved her. Evelyn climbed up slowly, careful with her steps, while Luke stood nearby, in case she needed help. He didn't touch her unless she nodded first, and that small bit of respect settled her nerves more than anything else had since she'd left home. Once she was seated, Luke climbed up beside her and took the reins. The horses snorted softly, eager to move, but he guided them in a calm manner. They rolled forward at a gentle pace, leaving the train station and its noisy steam clouds behind. Evelyn watched the town slip past them. Red Creek was smaller than she expected, only a handful of shops, a church with a bell that looked too heavy for its tower, and a row of houses painted in sun-faded colors. Children played near the well, and a couple of older men sat outside the general store, tipping their hats in greeting as the wagon passed. Luke nodded back politely to everyone. Evelyn noticed how people seemed to respect him. There were no uneasy glances, no strange stares that matched the frightening stories she had heard. Instead, folks looked at him as if he were a man they could count on. That confused her even more. How could someone with such a soft manner carry the dangerous reputation she had been warned about? She sat straight, folding her hands neatly in her lap, unsure how to act. Luke noticed her stiffness and spoke in a low, warm tone that filled the space between them without crowding her. "You must be tired," he said. "Traveling so long can wear a person down." "Yes," Evelyn admitted softly. "It was many days on the train. Did you get enough to eat?" "Sometimes the food on those rides isn't the best." "It was simple," she replied shyly. "But fine." Luke nodded, smiling a little. "Once we reach the ranch, I'll fix something warm for you. Or if you'd rather rest, I can leave you be until you're ready." Evelyn looked at him, surprised that he considered her comfort so carefully. She wasn't used to being asked what she preferred. Most choices in her life had been made for her, not offered to her. The wagon rolled beyond the last house, and the open land stretched out like a wide blanket around them. The sky looked larger than any she had seen, a deep, endless blue that seemed to hold all the possibilities she had never dared to hope for. Grass waved gently in the wind, and the mountains in the distance stood tall, their tops brushed with faint touches of snow. Evelyn took a slow breath. She had been afraid of this place, imagining it wild and harsh. Instead, it felt peaceful, wide, quiet, and honest. Luke kept his eyes on the path ahead but occasionally glanced her way in a thoughtful manner. "You don't have to talk if you don't feel like it," he said with a small smile. "I'm not much of a talker myself, but I do try." She returned a shy, small smile. "I don't mind talking. I'm just not sure what to say yet." "That's all right," he said. "We've got plenty of time." His words were simple, but they held a comforting message. There was no rush, no pressure, no demand. As they traveled, the wind brushed softly over them, carrying the scent of sage and sun-warmed grass. Evelyn's dress fluttered lightly around her ankles. Luke reached behind the seat and pulled out a folded blanket. "Here," he said gently. "It gets breezy out here. You can use this if you're cold." She accepted it with a grateful nod. The blanket smelled faintly of clean air, and the horses, a scent she found unexpectedly pleasant. After a stretch of quiet, Evelyn finally gathered the courage to ask something that had been sitting heavy on her mind. Did you receive the letters my aunt sent?" she asked. Luke nodded. "I did. They were very detailed." He chuckled softly, as if remembering something. "Your aunt is a woman who knows exactly what she wants." Evelyn smiled a little, recognizing the truth in that statement. "I hope she didn't say anything strange," she said cautiously. "No," Luke replied. "She mostly wrote about your skills, how responsible you are, and how you're used to working hard. She said you're a good woman who deserves a good home." Evelyn blinked slowly. Her aunt had said those words? She had never spoken them directly to Evelyn. Hearing them now felt like finding a small, hidden treasure. "She also wrote," Luke added thoughtfully, "that you've had a life full of responsibility. I figured you might want some space to breathe once you arrived. Evelyn felt her shoulders relax for the first time since the journey began. Thank you, she murmured. Luke nodded, as if it required no recognition, as if kindness was simply the most natural way to behave. The wagon turned onto a dirt road that stretched between fields where a few cattle grazed lazily. Birds glided overhead. The horses moved at an easy pace, their hooves creating a calm rhythm. After a few minutes, Luke spoke again, this time sounding a little unsure. I hope you're not disappointed, he said quietly. Evelyn turned her head in surprise. Disappointed in what? In me, he said with a soft, honest sigh. I wasn't sure what your aunt told you. Some folks around here, well, they can talk a lot. And not all of it is true. Evelyn hesitated. She didn't want to repeat the rumors, but Luke sensed it anyway. You must have heard things, he said politely. I don't blame you. Small towns talk. She lowered her gaze to her hands. I heard that you were strong, and that people were careful around you. Luke laughed gently, not offended at all. Well, strong might be true. Ranch work does that. But I'm careful with folks. I don't want anyone feeling uneasy around me. Evelyn studied his profile, the gentle curve of his jaw, the softness in his eyes, the calm way he held the reins. None of it matched the fearful stories she had heard. He looked like someone who valued patience. The trail grew slightly bumpier, and Evelyn's grip tightened instinctively on the seat. Luke slowed the horses immediately. Sorry about the bumps, he said kindly. Road's a little rough after last week's rain. It's all right, she said, though she appreciated his awareness. As the wagon rolled on, the land opened even wider. A large wooden fence came into view first, stretching far across the property. Beyond it was a neat ranch house, built from honey-colored timber. Smoke curled softly from its chimney, promising warmth. A barn stood nearby, painted a deep red, and a windmill turned lazily in the breeze. That's home, Luke said softly. As if he were offering her something fragile, the word settled in her chest with unexpected weight. Home. She had not thought of the ranch that way yet. But the atmosphere felt welcoming, like a place built for comfort as much as work. When the wagon stopped near the house, Luke hopped down first, then turned to her with a gentle expression. Take your time. There's no need to hurry. Evelyn stepped down slowly, feeling unsteady not because of the ground but because of how different everything felt from what she had imagined. Luke carried her suitcase to the porch and set it down carefully. He did not rush to open the door or expect her to follow immediately. Instead, he waited with quiet patience. Would you like to see the house first? He asked. Or sit outside for a moment? Evelyn looked around. The breeze lifted her hair softly. Birds rested on the fence rails. The house windows gleamed in the afternoon sun. I think I would like to see it, she said. Luke smiled warmly. All right then. He opened the door gently, as if opening it for a guest, not someone expected to live there. Inside, the house was tidy and simple. Wooden floors, a clean kitchen with a small table, shelves lined neatly with dishes, a sitting area with a comfortable couch, and sunlight flowing in through wide windows. I tried to keep things neat, Luke explained shyly. Didn't want you to feel like you were stepping into a mess. Evelyn touched the back of a wooden chair. It's lovely, she said softly. There's a room for you upstairs, Luke added. You can choose how you want to arrange it. If you like sewing or reading or anything like that, I'll help you set things up. Evelyn felt something warm bloom in her chest. This man, a man she had feared for months, was offering her more gentleness than she had known in years. After a moment, Luke spoke again, his voice soft but certain. You've traveled far. You deserve a place where you can breathe easy. Evelyn looked at him, truly looked, and felt her fear melt away like snow under sunlight. This man was nothing like the monster she expected. He was steady, respectful, patient. And somewhere deep inside her, a quiet hope took root. A hope that maybe, just maybe, this new life held more kindness than she had ever been given before. The sun rose early on the ranch, painting the sky with soft colors of peach and gold. Evelyn woke to the sound of birds chirping outside her window and the quiet creak of the windmill turning in the breeze. She had slept lighter than usual, partly because everything around her was new, and partly because her heart was still unsure where to settle. Yet even with the unfamiliarity, she felt a calmness she hadn't expected. When she opened her bedroom door and stepped into the hallway, the warm smell of coffee drifted from downstairs. Luke was already awake, of course. She had learned quickly that ranch work began before the sun fully stretched over the hills. She walked softly down the stairs, trying not to make noise. Luke stood in the kitchen, placing a pot of oatmeal on the table. He looked up, surprised but pleased to see her. "Good morning, Evelyn," he said with a gentle smile. "Hope you rested well." His voice, calm as always, eased her nerves. "I did, thank you," she replied shyly. "And you?" "Well enough," he said with a small shrug. "The early hours are natural for me." He poured her a cup of coffee but paused before handing it over. "Do you drink it?" "I can make tea instead if you'd prefer." The simple question made her smile. No one had ever asked her preference for something so ordinary. "Coffee is fine," she said softly. They ate breakfast together in comfortable quiet. Luke tried not to stare, though he seemed curious about her reactions to everything. Evelyn, meanwhile, watched him when he wasn't looking. He moved with steady purpose. His hands, though large and rough from ranch work, handled the dishes with surprising care. When breakfast ended, Luke stood and reached for his hat. "I'll be outside tending to the animals. You don't have to join unless you want to. There's no rush to learn everything right away." In the pizot, Evelyn hesitated. "Actually, I'd like to see the ranch, if that's all right." He nodded, clearly pleased. "Of course it's all right. Just wear something comfortable." She hurried upstairs, changed into a simpler dress, tied her hair back, and stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying the clean scent of grass and morning. The ranch felt alive, horses in their paddock, chickens wandering near the barn, cattle grazing peacefully beyond the fence. Luke walked beside her, pointing things out gently, like a tour guide who didn't want to overwhelm his guest. "That barn was built by my father," he said quietly. "I keep most of the tools there. And the horses stay in the back stalls. You'll meet them soon enough. Most are friendly." Evelyn nodded, enjoying the soft tone he used when he spoke about the land. It was clear he loved this place deeply. Inside the barn, horses lifted their heads when the pair entered. Evelyn froze, unsure if she should approach them. Luke noticed and smiled. "They're gentle," he assured her. "Here, let me introduce you." He stepped to a chestnut mare with a white stripe across her nose. The horse leaned forward, nudging Luke as if greeting an old friend. "This is Daisy," he said. "She's one of the calmest horses you'll ever meet." The mare turned her head toward Evelyn, who held still as Daisy sniffed her softly. Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "She likes you already," Luke said, sounding pleased. "Animals sense kindness." Evelyn blushed slightly at the compliment. Luke then showed her the chickens, the feed storage, the tack room, and the small vegetable garden behind the house. He explained everything patiently, never speaking too fast, never assuming she knew something she didn't. Throughout the morning, Evelyn found herself growing comfortable in his presence. She noticed how Luke always made room for her to walk, how he slowed his steps to match hers, and how he never raised his voice, not at her, not at the animals, not even when a fence latch stuck and took extra time to open. By midday, they returned to the house for a simple lunch of bread and stew. Afterward, Evelyn helped wash the dishes. She wasn't sure if she should, but it felt right. "You don't have to do that," Luke said when he saw her scrubbing a plate. "I want to," she replied gently. He smiled, a warm expression that reached his eyes. "All right then." They spent the afternoon walking the ranch boundary. Evelyn found the scenery breathtaking, the hills rising softly, the grass swaying like quiet waves, the sky stretching endlessly above them. She felt tiny but safe, like she had stepped into a story she never expected to live. As they walked, Evelyn noticed the peaceful look on Luke's face. It was the look of someone who felt at home, not just on his land, but in the quiet itself. At one point, she finally gathered the courage to ask something that had been sitting gently but firmly in the back of her mind. "Luke," she began softly, "may I ask you something?" He slowed his steps. "Of course. Anything." She hesitated. She didn't want to upset him. "When I lived back east, some people said things about you. Things that made me worried. I didn't know what to believe." Luke didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked slightly resigned, as if he had been expecting this conversation eventually. "I figured you'd heard something," he said quietly. "I didn't know what was true," she continued. "But you've been nothing but kind. So, I don't understand where the stories came from." Luke stopped walking and rested his hands on the fence rail, gazing out at the grazing cattle. "Some stories are just that, stories," he said slowly. "People talk. Sometimes they don't mean harm. Sometimes they just don't know the whole truth." Evelyn watched him carefully. She could tell he wasn't upset, just thoughtful. "A while back," Luke continued, "something happened in town. A young ranch hand was being treated unfairly by someone passing through. I stepped in to help. That's all." He didn't go into detail, and Evelyn didn't press him. Whatever happened, he spoke of it with calm acceptance, not anger or fear. "After that day," he said, "folks started saying things. Maybe I looked too serious. Maybe they misunderstood. Rumors grow easily in small places." He turned to look at her, his eyes gentle. "But I don't want you worrying about anything you heard. I'm not someone who enjoys trouble. I don't want anyone feeling uneasy around me." We? Evelyn felt her heart warm at his honesty. "You don't make me uneasy," she said softly. "Not at all." His expression softened even more, relief flickering through his eyes. "I'm glad to hear that." They continued walking side by side. The conversation settled between them like a soft blanket, comforting, not heavy. As the days passed, Evelyn grew more familiar with the rhythm of ranch life. She learned how to feed the chickens in the morning, how to sweep the barn aisle without stirring too much dust, and how to prepare simple meals for two. Luke always offered to help, but he never hovered or corrected her. He treated her as someone capable, someone equal. When he taught her how to ride a horse, he stayed close, but gave her space to learn at her own pace. Daisy, the gentle mare, carried Evelyn safely as Luke walked beside them, his hand lightly touching the reins only when needed. "You're doing well," he encouraged her when she managed to guide Daisy in a small circle. "She trusts you." Evelyn felt a glow of pride at his words. No one had ever told her she was doing well at anything before. Hearing it now planted a seed of confidence inside her. Every evening, after the day's work, they sat together on the porch. Sometimes they talked about small things, the weather, the animals, the town. Sometimes they simply enjoyed the quiet, watching the sky turn shades of purple and gold as the sun dipped behind the hills. During these moments, Evelyn began to understand something important about Luke. His strength wasn't in his size or his ranch work. His strength was in his gentleness. It was in the way he spoke calmly, the way he respected her space, the way he listened when she shared small memories from her childhood. He was not the man the rumors described. He was better, steadier, softer, more patient than anyone she had known. Evelyn found herself feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Safe. One evening, as they watched the horses grazing, she finally said the words she had held inside since arriving. "I'm glad I came here," she whispered. Luke looked at her slowly, his expression open and warm. "I'm glad you did too." The wind brushed past them gently, carrying the quiet promise of a future shaped not by fear or rumors, but by trust and simple kindness. And in that peaceful dusk light, Evelyn knew she was living a story far kinder than the one she had expected. The days on the ranch began to pass in a soft, steady rhythm, almost like the gentle swaying of the tall grass that surrounded the house. Every morning, Evelyn woke to the sound of birds singing near her window, and every day she discovered something new about this life she was slowly growing into. She learned the way the light landed differently on the hills at sunrise compared to sunset, how the air felt cooler near the creek, and how the horses seemed to understand the mood of the person approaching them. And with every passing day, she learned a little more about Luke too. He was a man who didn't rush his words or his steps. He took his time with everything, whether it was fixing a fence, feeding the animals, or simply listening to Evelyn speak. His patience felt like a warm, steady hand guiding her toward a life she never imagined she could have. For Evelyn, the biggest change wasn't in the work she did or the place she lived, it was in the way her heart slowly loosened. As if the knots that had been tied there for years were beginning to soften. One morning, after several weeks on the ranch, she found herself humming as she swept the kitchen floor. She had never hummed while working before. Back home, chores had always been something done out of duty, never with joy. But here, in this quiet house filled with sunshine and open space, she felt light enough to hum. Luke passed through the kitchen doorway, holding a coil of rope he planned to take to the barn. When he heard her humming, he paused without intending to, a smile spreading slowly across his face. "You seem in good spirits today," he said gently. Evelyn stopped, embarrassed. "Oh, I didn't realize I was making noise." "It wasn't noise," he said warmly. "It was nice. The house feels lively when you're here." His words were simple, but they settled softly in her heart. The more they shared small moments like this, the more Evelyn felt the invisible walls between them begin to fade. She no longer wondered whether she should ask Luke something or hold back. He made her feel safe enough to speak freely, even about small things like the way she used to bake bread with her mother, or how she always loved the smell of freshly washed linens. Luke listened to every story as if each one mattered. He never interrupted, never judged, never hurried her, and in return, he shared small pieces of himself, stories about his father, teaching him how to ride, his mother's love for sunflowers, and his dream of expanding the garden behind the house. One evening, he surprised her by planting seeds she had mentioned liking. "You said you loved marigolds," he explained shyly. "I figured we could try growing them here." Evelyn felt something warm bloom inside her, something softer than gratitude, something deeper than comfort. As the weeks turned into months, they slipped into an easy companionship. They worked side by side during the day and shared quiet conversation in the evenings. Sometimes they walked to the creek and sat under the shade of a cottonwood tree, letting their thoughts settle like dust after a long ride. Other nights, they sat on the porch in comfortable silence, watching the stars glow one by one like lanterns being lit across the sky. But even with the peace between them, Evelyn sometimes wondered if Luke truly felt at ease. He was gentle, yes, but he was also cautious, as if afraid she might feel pressured or overwhelmed. One evening, as they sat on the porch, Evelyn noticed him fiddling with his hat rim, something he did only when he was unsure of himself. "Is something on your mind?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Nothing important." But she knew him well enough now to sense when he was holding something back. "Luke," she said, her voice gentle but steady, "you can tell me." He looked out toward the fading light, his expression thoughtful. I want to make sure you're happy here," he said quietly. "I know this wasn't your choice at first. You came because you had to, not because you wanted to." So, his honesty wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Evelyn placed her hands in her lap, unsure how to respond at first. She thought of the life she had left behind, of days filled with chores done under watchful eyes, of long evenings waiting for someone to tell her what to do next, of a future decided for her without a single gentle question. Then she thought of this ranch, the open sky, the calm horses, the sound of Luke's voice calling her name, the simple kindness in every gesture he made. "I wasn't sure what to expect," she admitted softly. "But being here, it feels different than anything I knew before." Luke turned to look at her, listening with his whole attention, the way he always did. "I wake up and I don't feel afraid," she continued. "I feel peaceful. And that's new for me." Luke's eyes softened. "You deserve peace," she nodded. "And you give it. And you give it." The way his breath caught for a moment told her that her words had reached him deeply. After that evening, something shifted between them, not suddenly, but slowly. like the gentle turning of a page in a book. They found themselves leaning a little closer when talking. Their conversations grew longer, warmer, filled with small laughter that came easily. Evelyn found herself looking for Luke without meaning to, checking the barn if she didn't see him outside, glancing toward the field to catch sight of him riding Daisy or repairing a fence. And Luke, in turn, seemed to seek her company more often. One late afternoon, as the sun was setting in soft orange light, Luke asked if she'd like to walk to the far pasture. She agreed, and they walked side by side along the fence line. The horses grazed peacefully. The grass brushed softly around their boots, and the air felt cool and gentle. As they reached the top of a small hill, Evelyn paused to admire the view. The land stretched endlessly before her, bathed in warm light that made everything look like a painting. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is," Luke agreed. But when she looked at him, she realized he wasn't looking at the land, he was looking at her. A soft warmth filled her chest, and she found herself unable to look away from him. For a long moment, they simply stood there. The wind, lightly lifting the ends of Evelyn's hair. She felt a mixture of peace and anticipation, as if something important was about to happen, but neither of them wanted to rush it. At last, Evelyn reached out slowly, very slowly, and touched his hand. It was the first time she had done it without needing a reason or instruction. Just a quiet desire to connect. Luke froze in surprise, but only for a heartbeat. Then his fingers closed gently around hers, warm and steady. "Evelyn," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "Are you sure?" She nodded, her voice barely audible. Yes, she wasn't acting out of duty or expectation. For the first time, it was her choice, fully and quietly hers. Luke let out a breath of relief, as if he'd been holding it in for months. His thumb brushed lightly across the back of her hand, the touch tender, respectful, full of quiet promise. "I didn't want to push you," he said earnestly. "I didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything." "You never made me feel that way," she said. "You made me feel safe." They stood on the hill until the sun dipped behind the horizon, their hands joined, the sky slowly turning shades of lavender and blue. It felt like time itself had paused just long enough for them to understand what they meant to each other. From that day on, their bond only deepened. They continued their routines, feeding animals, tending the garden, fixing broken things around the ranch, but now there was a soft thread connecting them, weaving through every shared glance and quiet moment. Luke became less hesitant with his smiles. Evelyn felt more confident in her steps, in her words, in the life she was building here. She often caught herself laughing quietly at simple things. Luke talking to the chickens as if they were children, or the way Daisy nudged his shoulder when she wanted attention. One crisp evening, they sat on the porch again, wrapped in the warm glow of lantern light. Evelyn rested her hand on Luke's arm, feeling no fear in the closeness. She turned to him and said softly, "I expected a frightening life. I expected everything to be cold and hard. But instead, I found kindness. I found home." Luke looked at her with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "You found someone who cares for you," he said gently. "And always will." Evelyn smiled, a soft, grateful, hopeful smile, the kind that belonged to someone who had finally found where she was meant to be. And in that moment, under the quiet Wyoming sky, surrounded by open land and warm lantern light, their marriage became something new. Not an arrangement, not a duty, but a choice. A quiet, beautiful, mutual choice. A beginning, not an ending.